What's going on, everybody? Thank you so much for joining us here on episode 94 of the 90 Feet from Home Fantasy Baseball Podcast. We are presented by Underdog Fantasy, and I'm your host, Joe Orico. You guys can check me out over on Twitter at Joe Orico99, posting all the new stuff over there, articles, podcasts, all the updates on new stuff you guys can check out over there. It's been a little bit of a hiatus over the last couple of weeks on the show with the baseball season ending. Got a lot of stuff going on. So we haven't done a podcast in a couple of weeks, but we are back with a vengeance, and a great friend of the show and a colleague of mine. I always forget that we're colleagues, but my good friend Scott Bogman from FantasyPros and from In This League is here to join me for a special pod. And we're starting a series where we're going to be going through each of the 30 teams around Major League Baseball. We're starting at the top. We're starting with Mr. Bogman and the Arizona Diamondbacks. Boggs, been too long since we've got behind the mic. How you doing today, my friend?
I know, man. I'm happy to be on with you talking some baseball again. It's going to be a fun time. Unlike the end of my regular season here for the Diamondbacks was not so much fun. But yeah, I'm ready to get into it and talk about some D-backs. It's time to pick up the pieces and move forward. I'm watching the stupid Padres and Dodgers in the playoffs. I hate it.
It's a disappointing season for you guys. You did make it to the World Series last year. I mean, as a Blue Jay fan, I would happily trade the last couple of years with you guys. No question.
Not a lot of sympathy from the Blue Jays fans. I understand that. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a couple of connections there with Toronto and Arizona. We'll talk about those a little bit later on. But Boggs, before we get going, I know we were talking before we started recording about everything you're doing, but let the fans know, let the audience know about what you got going on right now.
Yeah, baseball coming back, I think, next month on In This League with the Welsh. So I'll be talking some baseball over there. But right now, I'm doing fantasy football stuff for In This League with the Welsh. Also, Fantasy Pros, a lot of fantasy football content and college football content. I still have my podcast with Nick Allen and Xavier Trish at CFB Winning Edge as well. So if you're a football fan, and you like a lot of content, I am doing so much of it, you will definitely get tired of me. So if you start listening to me, I appreciate it. You don't have to listen to everything I do because that would take up most of your time. But I am on a lot of podcasts these days.
We're oversaturated, but that comes with the territory. But Bogman does fantastic work. I can say as somebody who is one of the producers of a lot of the stuff you do, Boggs. Fantastic stuff on the college side. On the Dynasty pod, always have fun working through those with you and Pat. Great stuff. So make sure you're following Boggs at Bogman Sports over on Twitter and checking out all of his work at Fantasy Pros and at In This League. But like I said, we're going to be breaking down the Diamondbacks today. Is there anywhere else to start except for Corbin Carroll, who had one of the more interesting fantasy seasons? I think if you ask head-to-head players what they think of his year, they'd say, he sucked. He disappointed me. If you ask a roto player, I don't think that they'd be as disappointed because the end of season stat line was still pretty good. 22 homers, 121 runs, 74 ribbies, 35 steals, and a 231 batting average. It wasn't quite his 2023 season, Boggs, but what do you think of what Corbin Carroll did as a whole in 2024? Was it disappointing to you?
Yeah, it was definitely disappointing to me, especially because half of the year was miserable. More than half the year. His first half numbers were awful. 212, hit 5 homers. I don't know what it was in there. If the shoulder got healthier, I'm assuming that's what it was after the break, where he hit 258 after the break with 17 homers and stole 17 of his 35 bases in the second half as well. And we're talking about 63 games versus 93 games. So 30 fewer games and 12 more homers and almost the same amount of stolen bases. And he hit 40 points higher. So yeah, it was definitely a disappointing year for Corbin Carroll. Doesn't mean that next year is going to be disappointing. I think we got some good news in the second half going in, and it should make him a little bit of a value. I feel like going into next season. I haven't sat and made my first round rankings yet or anything with all the football I've been doing, but I know he is going to be on the low end in the first and possibly push down to the second as well.
Yeah, I've kind of had this debate. I'm like you. I haven't actually put anything solidly on paper yet. I feel like he's probably going to go back into the first, beginning of the second. If you're talking like 15 teamers, 12 teamers, he's probably a second rounder. I think the shoulder is such a polarizing thing because we at all, the world, Diamondback fans, fantasy managers, everybody had kind of said, okay, there's something wrong with his shoulder here. But like you said, 17 home runs in the second half in like 60 games. Maybe he didn't need any kind of procedure. Maybe it just healed on its own and he's able to to fully be wheels up heading into next season. Let's say you're sitting there at the turn, pick 13, 14. Would you worry about making that selection? Would you rather go a different route, leaving the Diamondbacks fandom aside? Do you think it's a smart pick at the end of the first round right now?
I do. I mean, like you said, it seems like a non-surgical route has worked here. So, and I just the second half is so encouraging. So unless he comes into the offseason, they say, yeah, we're going to go ahead and do shoulder surgery for him in the offseason and hope he's back early in the regular season. Let's see what he looks like in spring training and go from there, because I think he's going to probably be healthy. And stranger things have happened. Remember, you ever hear the story of how Roy Oswalt cleared up the stuff in his shoulder? He was fixing his car in the off season and he grabbed the cap and it was, he got shocked and electrocuted from it. And he said his shoulder felt better ever since then. Has no idea what happened. So like stranger things have happened. Then, hey, you took a little time off for the break and then you come back in the second half and things start clicking for you. So maybe it was just a little bit of downtime. Maybe you heard it early in the season. I don't know what it was, but it seems like he's going to be okay moving forward. So let's take that news and run with it and hope it stays that way.
It looks like he's okay. I mean, in the second half, he was like a top 5 overall fantasy player. So
Yeah.
hard to be too concerned if these halves were flipped and he was amazing in the first half and didn't do anything in the second half. I wonder how that would change what people's view of him is. But overall, it's still like a third round season for Corbin Carroll. So while it was disappointing as a whole, specifically for head-to-head managers, I don't think that if you had a terrible season, it was necessarily because of Carroll. A lot of other things would have had to go wrong because you still got 20 homers, 35 steals, ton of runs. So it was disappointing, but it could have been a hell of a lot worse. Let's put it that way. If he didn't turn things around, it could have been so much worse. This team offensively was the number 1 offense in baseball in terms of runs scored. The offense, there's a lot of great offensive players we're going to talk to. It's not really here where the problems are. Let's move on to Ketel Marte.
Real quick, can I give you some numbers on this offense? Okay, so and this is just like basic stuff that you can find. First in runs, first in OBP, first in batting WAR, second in average, second in slugging percentage, second in WOBA, fourth in WRC plus, fourth lowest K percentage, fourth in ISO, fifth in homers, fifth in walk percentage, fifth in BABIP, and 15th in stolen bases, because they didn't need to steal bases because everybody was coming around to score. So the offense was absolutely not the issue for the D-backs this year.
The offense was brilliant. It was I forget when I actually took notice, maybe July, August, and you start looking, it's like, this is the number 1 offense, like not even just a good one, the number 1 offense. Another huge reason was Ketel Marte, who was by far, if you look at dollar values, player raters, was the number 1 second baseman in fantasy, even missing 26 games this year. 36 homers, 93 runs, 95 ribbies, 7 steals, and a 292 batting average. I've had this conversation with Welsh a couple times on leading off about if he should be the number 1 second baseman heading into next year. Are you on that train where he should be number 1 ahead of guys like Albies, ahead of Altuve, probably not Marcus Semien at this point, but is Marte the number 1 second baseman in fantasy at this point?
I mean, I think he's at least in consideration for it, for sure. He put up an MVP level season. I mean, Ohtani obviously had ungodly numbers, so he will have it. And once he's pitching next year, he will win it again, as well as he should. But yeah, I think Ketel was the best second baseman in the NL for sure this year, and one of the better ones in the game. So career year, and I'll tell you why. It's because I doubted him. I said, he gets hurt every other year. This is going to be the year he gets hurt. I'm not buying it. So that was my own guy. I was thinking, everyone else had the World Series hangover, but Ketel Marte. He was the only one that didn't have it to start the season. So very happy to see him get going. And, I do think the injuries as he gets older are probably going to mount because he has had them in the past. So we'll see. But great year from him this year. Absolutely outstanding.
My worry would be buying off of a career year type. And I mean, you can argue 2019 was probably the career year for him. He was an MVP finalist, I'm pretty sure, in 2019. Yeah. But as he is now 30 and he's going to be 31 next month, paying what'll probably be like a second-ish round price, third round price, kind of does worry me a little bit when I see like those early drafts, that the one that Bubba did. I'm pretty sure Altuve went like 3 or 4 rounds later. And if that's going to be the discrepancy, I feel like I would just wait at that point. What do you think on that front?
For sure. I mean, you don't. This is going to be a classic case of you don't want to pay for last season, right?
Yeah.
You just don't want to do it, and people are definitely going to do it. And Welsh and I, we went on the last couple episodes of ITL before the season ended. We went through the first, like, what we would consider the first 3 rounds at the end of the year there, and who was like on the outside. And we had Cattell kind of firmly in the second. We had more second round options than first round options for sure. But yeah, I mean, he was in there with the likes of Altuve, and he is probably going to end up going too high this year. You're right about that.
Yeah, I just worry paying for last year's stats or last week's stats or however you want to frame it. I think he's still very safe. We're talking about how great the offense is, and he should be still a top 50, top 60 player if he's healthy. But do I want to pay a top 30 price? I'm not so sold on that at this point for Cattell. Another guy who had a career year who kind of just came out of nowhere, Jock Peterson, the best offensive season of his career, comes at age 32 playing in what he's usually done in a kind of a platoon role, but 23 homers, 7 steals, which was kind of the big number, a career high in steals for him, 62 runs, 64 ribbies, and he also hit 275. A 151 WRC plus. Jock Peterson was essentially a player and a half this year for the Diamondbacks. Is there any chance you think that he can kind of keep this up going forward? I'm pretty sure he is a free agent now, but any chance you think maybe they'll bring him back, and what your interest level would be in Jock for 2025?
If he's back with the D-backs, for sure, and it's because Torrey put him in the position to succeed. I mean, how many at-bats did he have against lefties? Can you take a guess? I'm looking at, he had, what would that be? 367 ABs this season. How many do you think were against lefties?
40, 35, 40?
32. 32. He put him in, so he hit 219 against lefties. He had 1 homer against the lefty, but against righties, he hit 281 with 22 homers. It was a perfect platoon between Jock and Randall Grichuk. So, especially in those daily lineups, when you're playing daily and you can set daily, you just know when Jock is going to be in the lineup and when he's not. When they're playing a lefty, he's out. They're putting a Randall Grichuk in. So they're just tried to not expose him to left-handed pitching, and it went really well for him. So if he's back with the D-backs, then yes, I believe his is is it a mutual option? I can't
Yeah, it's a
100%
mutual option.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I would think that he would want to be back with the D-backs, and I think the D-backs would want him. It just depends on how much money are we trying to save to re-sign Christian Walker, and is that going to be a priority? And if it's not, who plays first? Because Josh Bell is also a free agent. Are they going to let Pavin do that? Are they going to, Goldie's a free agent? Maybe a little return there. I would love that, but I would want Walker first. He's a Gold Glove guy that is hitting very well now. And it broke out with the D-backs. So I would prefer to have Christian Walker back, but I don't know after the Jordan Montgomery debacle if we're going to be paying somebody else. So we'll see.
Or if anybody's going to want to come after what was it the owner, the general manager started
yes,
taking shots at
Ken
a guy
Kendrick.
currently under contract with the team.
Yeah. Well, he said, that was my big mistake, blah, blah, blah. I think he was trying to get him to not take his deal, but why wouldn't he? Well, I mean, we'll get to the pitching when we get to
Especially
the pitching.
now, he's going to want to, reach into those pockets if he can. But you mentioned Christian Walker there a couple times. It would be interesting, by the way, if Goldschmidt ends his career as a Diamondback. I feel like all parties involved would probably be in favor of that.
Yes.
But Christian Walker has been one of the better first basemen in fantasy for the last really the last 3 seasons. He's been fantastic. This year wasn't quite up to the same level in terms of home runs, but still 26 homers, 72 runs, 84 ribbies, a couple stolen bases, hit 251. Very solid season from Christian Walker, and actually the same WRC plus as he had the year prior. So as a free agent here, it sounds like you want them to go to Walker, but heading into an age 34 season where we did see the home run output kind of go down a little bit, from a fantasy point of view, what's your interest level there?
Yeah, I think it would be pretty middling. I like you said, the age is going to kick in. Still, in terms of being a fan, still a Gold Glove first baseman for sure. So,
Yeah.
but I do think that it's going to dip a little bit. Another guy that's probably going to cost you a little bit more than he should,
Yeah.
because of his recent success and his age, but not a bad option. You know what I mean? Like, it's one of those. He is one of those guys where it really depends on how the first base market is moving to start the season. And, because he's a guy that can stay on boards too long, and people are just like, he's older. He got hurt a little bit last year. Let's let him dip for a couple extra rounds. And he's sitting at the top of your board to where the point where you're like, I don't know why we're not taking him here. He's at least a value here. So he could turn into one of those guys, but it depends on the desperation of first. So
I'm hoping that he can get to around like the 140, 150 number overall. And then, if you're talking round 10, round 12, you need a first baseman. I'm hoping that's where he lands, and maybe he does. I think it'll be, I don't know. I'm kind of interested to see where the market lands him, because if he was going to pick like 95 or if he was going to pick 160, I don't think it would surprise me either one. I'm kind of interested to see what the early drafters are going to do. And I think they're actually, the NFBC already opened up their draft board. So we'll have ADP sooner than we probably would have expected before the playoffs are done, probably. But shifting gears here to the outfield now, and an old friend of mine who, when his time, well, I don't know him personally, I shouldn't say it like that, but Lourdes Gurriel Jr., who I really liked in his time in Toronto, up and down type of player. Sometimes he looks fantastic, and it was the beginning of this season, I think it was this year, where he looked really great, really did cool off. The end line was 18 homers, 72 runs, 75 ribbies, 7 steals, and a 279 batting average. Overall, pretty solid season from Gurriel. Did you like what you saw, and would you potentially like to invest in him next season? He's not going to be flying up boards, but as you're like fourth, fifth outfielder type, do you like Gurriel for that type of role for your team?
Yeah, I mean, a guy that doesn't kill you in batting average. He hits homers, he drives in runs, he scores runs. He'll be on the back end of those stolen bases like Big Jock was, of course. So, there's not a lot to dislike about Lourdes. A little banged up at the end of the season there, but
Yeah.
some of these guys are aging vets, and it was a big problem this season at the end with these guys getting banged up kind of, uh, you know, we just never had the full lineup out there. It didn't matter. Still first in runs and everything. The pitching is the side that let us down this season. But Lourdes he's just always comes at a deal, I feel like. And he's one of those guys that where we're saying maybe Walker falls down because of his age. Lourdes just kind of gets ignored because he doesn't have he's not raising your batting average a ton. He's not adding a ton of homers, but he doesn't hurt you in anything. He lifts you in a little bit. He's like above average in everything, which is outside of stolen bases, which is a very good player to have. And people kind of just don't think of him because he's not getting you one specific thing, but he does everything pretty well.
Yeah, he's one of those classic, not sexy type of fantasy players where you look back at the end of the year and you're like, that was pretty good. And like you said, he doesn't hurt you anywhere. I love those type of players where even if they're not a huge, they're not 330 hitters, but 270, 280 hitters. They're not stealing 40 bases, but they're stealing you like 10 bases. They're just kind of doing enough across the board that makes themselves really valuable. Real life fantasy point of view, I'm a big fan of Gurriel. His defense does leave something to be desired sometimes, but we're not
He's
talking about
kind
that.
of Castellanos in that respect. Like
Yeah.
he'll make the plays that he should make, and he'll make some of the plays that like most people would make, and he probably shouldn't make. He'll make a lot of those too. But yeah, he'll kick it around every
Yeah.
once in a while. But he has gotten much better as a fielder since coming to Arizona.
He does have a great arm. I will say that. He has a fantastic arm. Sometimes, like you said, he'll kick it around a little bit, but from a fantasy point of view, we don't care. As long as you're still on the field, kick it around all you like, as long as you're still getting those at bats. But somebody who I really want to talk about, who was somebody that we talked about a lot on leading off down the stretch, and somebody that was a hot pickup, and that's Jake McCarthy, who, after really being impressive in 2022, people kind of bought into him for 23, got let down. But this season, 142 games for Jake McCarthy, 25 steals, 8 homers, 66 runs. He hit 285, though. It felt like kind of a semi breakout at the end of the season. Are you going to be buying into McCarthy next year as somebody who can take another step forward, or is this kind of who he is at this point? Single digit homers, good stolen bases, or do you think there's another level there for him?
I think there might still be another level, still youngish, at least in his development. And, the big breakout at the end of the year. And he's a hard worker, man. He's always out there doing stuff. So I think that for McCarthy, what the old scouting trope is, power is the last tool to develop. And I think that is something that is still possibly in the bag. I mean, turn some of those line drives into homers, and you have a very good fantasy player here. So he's a guy that, I think people will know him because of his, especially the people who he won money at the end of the year will for sure remember Jake McCarthy. But I think a lot of people don't know, what his, I guess what his ceiling is. And I think his ceiling is higher than what it was this season. Now, can he turn into a pumpkin and hit 225 again, like we saw Alec Thomas do? Of course. I think that's in the bag as well. And if you even want to say that's a more likely outcome than a breakout, then I understand that. You know what I mean? We've seen that way more often than we do see a breakout. But I do think that there is wiggle room in there for him to get a little bit better this season. And it's definitely in the cards if everything works out right.
His defensive metrics are improved. I mean, he played 142 games, so you'd figure, a good defensive guy who's going to steal bases, like he's going to play. And I think if you're talking about like projecting draft price, maybe some of the people, like you said, who picked him up and won a championship are going to push him up a little bit, but he doesn't feel like somebody who's going to be a helium guy. You're going to get him after pick 200 as your fourth or fifth outfielder. And if you're getting 30 steals, regular playing time in a top 2 or 3 offense, maybe next year again, I think you could do a lot worse. I think
he's going to have a weird minimum maximum in terms of those picks, right? Like there's going to, some of those leagues that draft in November, December, there's going to be somewhere where he drops to like post 250, 300, somewhere like that. And then he's going to have like a 202 somewhere in there as well from some crazy Diamondback fan. Like I think that's probably going to, maybe this crazy Diamondback fan, but yeah, not that high. But yeah, I think he's going to have a weird, like, one really askew off one league where they just kind of ignored him. I think he's going to have that really weird min-max by the time we get to March.
I can totally see that. I fully co-sign. There will be some fluctuation with Jake McCarthy, and I think there will be as well with the next guy, Eugenio Suarez. What a turnaround. He was hot garbage for the first half of the season, even getting dropped in deeper leagues probably. And he ends up with 30 homers, 101 ribbies, a 256 batting average, which might have been the most surprising thing for Suarez, who's been a 220, 230 hitter. The power was there, but he hit for average. He did kind of everything down the stretch and had arguably a career year. Is there any repeatability in what we saw from Suarez? Are you going to invest in him next year thinking that we're going to get another 30 and 100? Or is this kind of, he got lucky, he got hot, but we shouldn't expect it again?
I mean, this is the ultimate Eugenio Suarez season. 216 in the first half with 10 homers. And there was legit thought that the Diamondbacks were going to dump him. Like he was not going to be on the team. They're going to release him and go with, Perdomo over at third, or Blaze Alexander, move him to third and have Perdomo play short. Right. So that was a lot of talk. Like they were talking about that on the broadcast, is that could potentially happen. So, and then just to see the crazy turnaround, 216, 10 homers in the first half, 307 with 20 homers in the second half is just an unbelievable turnaround. I don't think he'll be with the Diamondbacks next year is the issue. I think he's, I believe it's a club option. It's for 15 mil. And, we know Jordan Montgomery's probably taking his because he's not getting 23 and a half or whatever it is on the open market after his disastrous year with the D-backs this year. So he's probably taking that. And Christian Walker is a free agent. So they're going to want to at least make a run at him and try to get him back. So I don't think Suarez is on this team next year. I think he's going to be somewhere else. If Bregman isn't back with Houston, I think that could be an option for him. There's plenty of other spots that are looking for a third baseman, of course, but I think I would love to see him in Houston hitting in Minute Maid to the Crawford boxes. I think that would be a great spot for him if they don't re-sign Bregman. But I think the D-backs are filling this spot with Jordan Lawler next year. I think he's going to end up because he, in AAA, he played third a little bit, so and got some work there. So I think that is going to be the plan. Keep Perdomo short, have Lawler play third, and just have a cheaper option so you have more money to potentially sign Christian Walker. And if it's not Walker, then maybe it's getting Goldie back or signing Josh Bell back to a deal because he was pretty good at the end of the year with the D-backs too. So bunch of options for third. I don't think Suarez is back in Arizona.
This team could potentially look a little bit differently on the offensive side. If Suarez isn't back, if Walker's not back, they got to make some changes. Who knows? Who knows what the team is going to look like?
Yeah.
I know somebody who will be there for sure is Gabriel Moreno.
Your boy.
Oh man, I was ready to breathe fire when I saw this trade happen initially a couple of years ago. What the hell were the Blue Jays doing?
Dalton Varsho was a little better this year, though. He's a little better this year.
He was a little bit better. He's a little bit better. I mean, if he wasn't an amazing top of the line defender, I'd say get him the hell out of here. But he's a fantastic defensive outfielder, which is kind of a redeeming quality when you hit, below the Mendoza line. But Gabriel Moreno, I personally, a couple years ago, this is probably like on old takes exposed at this point, but I was saying like he's going to be fighting for the number one fantasy catcher by like 2025. I think I would have said at the time. Hasn't exactly gone that way. I mean, there are things that suggest it could. He hits for a good average. He still is able to steal a few bases, where with catchers, you're not really getting any. But overall, I know he dealt with some injuries, but kind of a disappointing couple of years for Moreno. Do you think there's still another step in him, or should we start to maybe reevaluate our expectations at this point?
Yeah, I think it just depends on where the power goes, right? Like 5 homers is not cutting it. Even, with the missed time, he played fewer than 100 games. I get it. 266 is fine for a catcher, I think anything above 240 is probably fine for most catchers. So we're doing okay there. He scores runs. He's not a, slog on the base paths or anything. He'll drive some in as well. He gets hits. So it's just the power. Is the power going to come at any point? And it doesn't really matter if it does or doesn't, right? Because he is one of the best framers. He's a Gold Glove catcher. So, I think what people are going to see is they're going to go look at Adrian Del Castillo's AAA numbers, and they're going to forget that a lot of that's boosted because he plays in Reno. He's also pretty solid with the Diamondbacks in holding it down for Gabby Moreno while he was out offensively. And they're going to want Del Castillo to play more because he is the better offensive option. It's just not going to happen. Gabby Moreno is one of the best guys behind the plate right now. He calls a good game. He's won Gold Gloves, one of the best framers. Everything defensively is so good about him that he could, peter out completely on the offensive side. And I still don't think they would get rid of him. He would be in the starting lineup more days than he's not. So, I don't expect a bunch of addition for Gabby Moreno, just maybe a little more healthy. And that's still hitting 260 to 275 and playing most days makes you a top 5 catcher. So I think he's probably top 5, but he's not one of those. I think he's the first one that will come at value. I think most catchers are ripoffs that people pay too much for. Yeah. And I think Gabby Moreno is probably the first one that's you're like, okay, this is decent. This is a decent buy, and I'll take him and put him in there. And he's not probably won't help me, but he's definitely not going to hurt me either.
I agree with you, especially in 2 catcher leagues where you see catchers going in like the second round, third round. I just can't. And I understand the value of getting like 600 good plate appearances from your catcher, but second round, I just can't do it. Third round, I can't really do it. If we're starting to get to like 4th, 5th, 6th, I can kind of do it. But if you're playing in like a single catcher league, you don't need to take any of these guys in the top 100. To your point, Moreno is probably going to be sitting there like maybe even past pick 200 in a 1 catcher league. And there's still hope, right? Like, you don't have to do a lot as a catcher. We've seen it over the last couple of seasons. Catcher I know that it's been a bit better, but it's not a good position. If you're hitting 260, stealing 8 bases, hitting 10 home runs in a good lineup, he might be the number 1 catcher in a given year. So I don't think that we can close the book on him still growing. Like we're talking about a guy who's just still 24 years old. Or what is he? He's still 24 years old. So there's still a lot of time left for Moreno to kind of blossom into hopefully a better offensive piece than we've seen the last couple of years. Rounding out the lineup, Geraldo Perdomo at the bottom. He's fine. I think he's okay. Is there any real interest that you have, fantasy point of view, going into drafts next year as kind of like a corner, middle infield type of option or anything like that? Any interest?
No, he's all defense, man. Like he's such a good defender. You know, 9 stolen bases in 100 games last year. Maybe there's a little bit there. 273 is not bad for him, you know. But he had a better year last year. He's hitting, especially in the first half of the season, he was hitting at the top of the lineup, made the All-Star game as well. I was actually at that one in Seattle with my buddy. So, yeah, I mean, he's good for what he is, and what he is not a fantasy player. So, yeah, that is Perdomo. He's a much better real life player than fantasy player.
I agree. The batting average is not bad, but like
Yeah.
overall, I just can't look at him as somebody that's a target. Like if I'm taking him, it's because like, oh shit, I need to backup shortstop or something. Like it's not because I'm actively looking to get him.
Yeah, I mean, if they unlock his power, then sure, that maybe he's an option then, but I don't think that's happening.
Let's round out the offense. Just a couple of people I want to pair together. Randall Grichuk and Josh Bell, who were kind of platoon / fill-in options at certain points this year. Both had pretty damn good seasons. Any carryover interest that you think you're going to have in 2025 for either Josh Bell or for Randall Grichuk, Boggs?
No, I mean, Grichuk had a great season, but again, just like Jock Peterson, Torrey set him up for success, mainly against lefties. And of course most pitchers are righties. He had to face more righties, of course, but 291 for him is just outstanding. He's not really a fantasy option though. I think like the low end fantasy options are going to be like, is Jordan Lawler back and is he starting at third? Did they not sign a free agent? Are they going with him? Is Alek Thomas going to come back? And if Alek Thomas comes back, is Lourdes switching over to DH? What's happening with that? Because obviously Corbin and McCarthy stay in the field, right? And then Alek Thomas probably goes to center because he's a Gold Glove center fielder. Then you have the fastest outfield in the league by a lot, by the way. Corbin Carroll, Jake McCarthy, Alek Thomas would be lightning quick there. So, and then Blaze, like does Blaze win that job at third if it's between him and Lawler going in. So I think those are like the low end fantasy guys. I don't have much for Jock. Josh Bell maybe, but that would have to be like Christian Walker is gone. They re-signed Josh Bell. Not very good defensively either. So I don't really want Josh Bell back, but I wouldn't hate him coming back, but I'd rather have him as a DH than a first baseman. That's for sure.
Yeah, he filled a role for you guys this year. Yeah. Did pretty well. Fantasy managers got a few good weeks out of him there, but I think I tend to agree. Like you want to aim higher if you end up having to get Bell back than you do, but not somebody that I'm going to be overly interested in unless if he ends up being the everyday first baseman or something, if they don't get Walker and they have to, and I don't even think that's going to happen. Like he would need to have an everyday role for me to be interested in drafting him going into the season.
Yeah, me too.
Let's start in talking about we talked about the offense as the number one offense. Let's talk about the pitching, look
at that. I got to go. That's weird. We're talking about pitching now. Here, I'll do the same thing on the pitching side, Joe. 11th in ground ball percentage, 12th in walk percentage, 14th in homers per 9, 17th in homers for fly ball, 17th in xFIP, 19th in FIP, 22nd in WAR, 26th in K per 9, 27th in ERA, 27th in left on base percentage. So if you're getting on, you're scoring, and 29th in BABIP. So when they get hit hard. So this was obviously the issue.
Very, very tough season, and it starts at the top with Zach Gallen. And honestly, looking at his numbers, they're not overly different than what you saw in 2023 when he was fantastic. 3.65 ERA, over 148 innings is not killing you. It's really not. It's just not what we were expecting, and maybe that's because he went deep into the playoffs. Last year, he pitched like 240 innings or something, and you did see him have to miss a little bit of time. And I maybe that's what it comes down to. But I think the command was also something that stuck out to me a little bit. For the last 3 years, he'd been a 5-6% walk rate guy, jumped up to almost 9%, shaved a point off of his strikeout rate. So going forward, should Gallen be considered a fantasy ace? Is he more of an SP2 in your eyes? What do you think about Gallen at this point?
I think he's probably an SP2. He is getting a little bit older. There's getting to be mileage on that arm. This is a guy, but I'll tell you what, you take him as a 2 and he could easily surprise. Maybe it was the deep playoff run and, getting rest and recuperation that is desperately needed for him right now could be just what the doctor ordered. You know what I mean? Like just relaxing and not having to go through the playoff crunch and the playoff run should help him going into next season. So that's a dude, the opposite of Ketel Marte, where Ketel Marte has this career year and maybe he's the number 1 second baseman and he's probably going to be going too high in drafts. It's going to be the opposite for Zach Gallen. Wasn't his best year, considered a down year, even though it was still a very good year, but he's still a high-end SP2 that has more in the bag if this rest is the thing. If it's the age, then, you're probably taking him as an SP2 and he's more of an SP3 or 4 for your fantasy team. So an ace for sure of our staff for the D-backs, but for your fantasy team, probably a pretty firm number 2.
When I'm just pulling together starting pitcher rankings, that was the first position that I wanted to start on. I have him at 31 right now, and it's probably too low. It's probably a little bit too low. I'm gonna have
Who's just ahead of him?
Just ahead of him is Justin Steele. Shane McClanahan is one that was kind of tough to plot. I've put him at 28 for now. Ronaldo Lopez and Michael King. Those are the guys I have right ahead of him.
Yeah, I think
very
King,
rough copy. This is a very rough copy.
Sure, of course. Yeah, no one's holding these up to the fire at all. So, I think I take him above most of those guys except for maybe King.
Yeah,
so
you take him over Ronaldo Lopez right now?
That one's tough. I think I would. Yeah, I think I probably would, but I'd have to dig a little deeper. I'm not even close to putting my list together. So
I'm a complete degenerate. I shouldn't even have a list at this point, but I couldn't help myself.
No, I'm just buried in college football. So
yeah, that's true. But I mean, that's like the DS is still going on. Like I don't need to have them up. I'm just like, let's start to brainstorm a little bit. But just for fun mostly right now. But I probably think Gallen belongs somewhere in the mid-20s, high mid-20s, somewhere like that. Let's talk about Merrill Kelly, though. Merrill Kelly had been one of my favorite pitchers the last couple of seasons. Somebody that was a huge discount. You got a 3.37 and a 3.29 ERA from him over almost 200 innings in each season in 22 and 23. This year, missed some time. He only threw 73 innings, and it wasn't as great. The per game production wasn't quite there. The strikeout rate came back down to earth a little bit from 26 to 21%, so more than a little bit, honestly. Wasn't a great year for Merrill, and now he is 30. He's going to be 36 later this week. So happy birthday, Merrill. Are we fading you heading into next season, Boggs? That's the question.
Yeah, I don't even know if he's going to be with the D-backs because he should be. His option is super cheap. It's a club option for $7 million. They should take it. Even make him the long man. You don't have to start him. Make him put him in the bullpen. See if you can extend his career that way. 36 is tough. And the cramping issues, he just could not get over them. So, it wasn't even like, is these big major things for a lot of it at the end of the year after he got over all that stuff. It was more just like, the cramping, which has plagued him for 2 years in a row. So, he's one of those guys that I'm probably going to have if he's still, in Arizona and still holding down a starting spot. I'm probably going to have a bunch of shares because he's going to be buried in rankings because no one expects anything from him. It's kind of like, okay, you hit that plateau, you got injured a bunch, you're over 35, you're off my list for a lot of people. And I don't hate that mindset. That's that is a decent strategy to have, to just say, look, if you're over 35 and you had injury issues last year, I'm not bothering with you. It's like a lot of Tinder profiles. So, but I think for deep leagues, NFBC leagues, 50 rounders, 15 teams, something like, he's going to get drafted in all of those, regardless of probably unless he retires, he's going to get drafted in all of those. And I'll probably have a decent amount of shares just in case he gets this cramping thing figured out and he can go again, because he's still decent. But this year was really injury plagued. So I'm kind of going to toss this one out the window, but you might be tossing him with it. So we'll see what happens in the offseason, where he ends up and if it is in a starting spot or not.
Yeah, I think it'll all come down to like pretty much everybody come down to the price. If he is just free, then I don't have any problem taking a shot because who knows? Like he could be Seth Lugo next year. He could be one of
Yeah.
those guys who just throws 30 starts that you're not really expecting a great outcome, and it ends up being like a two low three something ERA. Like I'm not expecting that, but he's shown the last couple of years that he is capable of having low ERAs over a full 200 innings. So I'm not going to be interested in him unless the price is low enough, but that's just we'll have to monitor where the ADP settles in. Hopefully, it's dirt cheap and we can get a bunch of shares. But let's talk Eduardo Rodriguez, somebody that I don't think I'll have any shares of really, regardless of where he's going. Awful, awful stuff. In his 10 starts, it was a 5.04 ERA and a 1.50 whip. No strikeouts, really bad command. I've never really been a big Eduardo Rodriguez guy, but I think at this point I'm just tapped out altogether, Boggs.
Man, I was so disappointed by this because I called this like 2 years ago. I was looking, I'm like, they're going to need to add a lefty. I think Eduardo's going to be the guy. I was like, why don't they trade for him? And then it was the whole thing with his wife where she wanted to stay in a major city and didn't want to go to a smaller market and
You're supposed to go
everything.
to
And
the
then,
D-backs. Or no, the Dodgers, right? The
yeah,
Dodgers.
yeah, they were trying to angle that way. And, obviously it worked out with the Diamondbacks in this offseason, but this is another year where I will crumple it up and throw it away. The D-backs are going to have all new pitching coaches next season. Hopefully they can help straighten him out, hopefully straighten Montgomery out, get some of these issues fixed. We'll see. That's not always how it works, but I understand, Eduardo is coming off a bad year and, a weird year the year before that, to say the least. So 2 years in a row, he's been a disappointment. So he's not going to be on a lot of radars, and he probably shouldn't be.
Yeah, I just at this point, like looking at his whole career, there are some good seasons mixed in, but it's very unpredictable if Eduardo Rodriguez is going to kill you or be any kind of help in a given year. I think the price is going to be knocked down, but it's going to have to be pretty damn low for me to really have much interest. Brandon Pfaadt is a really interesting one. I think he led the team in innings, 181 and 2/3. I might be wrong about that. That's off of memory, but 181 and 2/3. He started 32 games. The results were not what I was hoping for with a 4.71 ERA, but if you look below the surface in those ERA estimators, the FIPS, the Sierras, the XFIPS, they were all quite a bit better. They were all about a full run better. 365 Sierra, 358 XFIP. I think there's still a really great pitcher potentially in Brandon Pfaadt. Do you think we see it in 2025, or is he somebody who's going to need a little bit more development?
No, I think this is it, especially with new pitching coaches and staff there on the back end for him. So, and like you said, the underlying metrics were good. He was the only guy to start 32 games for the D-backs. He was the innings leader by a lot. 181.2 for him, 150.2 for Ryan Nelson, and then 148 for Zach Gallen, who was third. So yeah, it came down to Pfaadt. I thought he did a great job as our ace for a lot of the year. Zach Gallen was he only ended up missing 4 starts. It felt like more than that, but he was also yanked early in a bunch of games as well. Gallen was. So Pfaadt stood in and did his job this year. The ERA and the defense didn't always work out behind him, but I thought he did a great job. And I do think one of my favorite sayings there is meat on the bone for him to grow as well. So, and I think he will. I think we have not seen the peak of Brandon Pfaadt yet. So he's definitely a buy for me this year.
He was really hyped up. I think it was the first year I went to Arizona, 2022. I think that would have been the year where he led the minor leagues in strikeouts, and then it was like everybody was hyping him up for 2023.
He got smashed by the Rangers, didn't get an out in
I
that
think
sweaty start.
after a couple of years of disappointments like this, I feel like a lot of them will just be like, all right, enough. But I think this is, like you said, this is a year where it's going to be a potential huge breakout for Fod. I'm very interested for next season.
I think anyone that's listening to this in the off season, a fantasy podcast, they know, right?
Degenerate.
The degens like us, they know that Brandon Pfaadt was much better than his ERA. So led the team in strikeouts. There's more room to grow. I think everybody listening to this right now knows that. So I don't think you're going to get a decent discount on him. Maybe if you're in your home league and you're one of 3 people in that league potentially listening to something like this at this point in the year, you will get the discount on Brandon Pfaadt, but you're playing an NFBC, you're not getting a discount. He's going to be pretty expensive, I feel like.
Stay out of my draft rooms. I want to get a discounted Brandon Phelps to listen to this. Let's talk. We alluded to him earlier. Let's mention Jordan Montgomery, who we don't even know if he's going to be back. If I were Jordan Montgomery, I would take that option. I would have already taken it. I think it's 25 million or something like that. Like, take it
Yeah.
immediately after what he said about you, which was not very kind. But I
I'll
mean,
say this though. Jordan Montgomery, when we were in Boston, said that was where he wanted to play. He said Scott Boras obviously bungled everything, and and he wound up in Arizona. But like, I think that is where the resentment started for Ken Kendrick. It's like, this guy's already having a bad year. We paid him a bunch of money, and then he says he wanted to be in Boston. We wish you were in Boston too, not here. So I think that's, hopefully they can get this relationship back on track, because he has to take the money. Yeah. He's not getting that anywhere else, especially after the season that he had. Also didn't really stay in great shape during the offseason either. Came in, I thought, a little bit overweight. I mean, he's always been a thicker guy. And look, the pot calling the kettle black here. I am fat. I am also not getting paid $25 million. I control a little better if I was, you would think. But, I thought that, honestly, that was probably a decent part of it. It's not, he's not a guy that put on the weight and got better like Bartolo Colon. Not many guys are. So.
In terms of fantasy, the price is going to be pretty low. I just worry that he was always just kind of okay, and we thought that he was really great down the stretch in 2023, and maybe some people will still remember that great run he had. I just worry that he'll still be a little too expensive, but I don't really know what my opinion of him is. I don't know if this is a fair year to evaluate him on, like you mentioned, but at the same time, like, he came in, he didn't do his job, and every number is atrocious. The strikeouts are way down, the walks are way up. The price is going to have to be, like a lot of these pitchers we've mentioned, common theme, the price is going to have to be dirt cheap for me to really want any of Jomo next year.
Yeah, you'd have to hear like really encouraging reports in the offseason and an awesome spring training, and that's all too late in the process to really move him up the board. Like you said, everything was bad. He was banged up coming in, only ended up starting what was it? I guess 25 games, but he was miserable. He got moved to the bullpen. His ERA was over 6. His ERA was almost 5. It was 4.91. So there's just nothing good about Jordan Montgomery. So this is a guy that is absolutely going to have to, he's going to be an ad. If he's good, he is going to be an ad in most leagues. I don't think that a lot of people are going to be drafting him. Maybe in those deep leagues, where it's like, okay, I'm down to Jordan Montgomery, Eduardo Rodriguez, or a prospect. You know what I mean? Like, what do I do here? I guess I take the guys that are in a rotation and probably are, going to at least have a shot at it. But I think that's where these guys are going to go because of these miserable seasons that they had.
As they should. One more starting pitcher to mention is Ryan Nelson. And he was better, I think, this past season than he was in 2023. Still didn't exactly set the world on fire, but, raised the strikeout rate back up to 20%. The command was very solid. You have any interest here as a deep league starting pitcher here in Ryan Nelson?
Yeah, I mean, still 26, so there's a little room for growth there as well. Sierra was around 4, lower than the ERA, so that was good. XFIP was around 4 as well. K per 9 is kind of soft, so not your favorite ad. But yeah, in a deep league, or you're playing some insane 30-man, like, he's probably looking at a starting spot. But is he? That's the question, because all right, well, we know it's Fott, Gallen, Montgomery is going to be coming back, and you paid Eduardo, so that's 4. So it's Ryan Nelson. Is Merrill Kelly coming back? Any of these young guys going to take a step up in spring training as well? Like, so I think he has a rotation spot going in, especially if they decide to not re-sign Kelly. And the deal is so cheap, it's $7 million. The only, Welsh and I were talking about this, earlier. I think that the only thing that would permit them from bringing Merrill Kelly back is if they just want to use all of this money to try to throw at Christian Walker to keep that power in the middle of the lineup. So, and looking at what they did last year, they don't need to add offense. They might not even need to keep offense. Maybe it's more about adding, please God, money into this bullpen. Yeah, I think Ryan Nelson has a shot at a spot. But again, like the rest of those guys, going to be an ad more than a draft pick.
You've put a perfect segue in for me there to talk about this bullpen, where 10 different players recorded a save this year, including Ryan Nelson and Jordan Montgomery. Complete nonsense. Seawald had 16 of them. Martinez had 8. Ginkel had 5. After that, it was a random assortment. As of today, is Justin Martinez the lead candidate for saves going into next season, or is there another name that you think has a better chance?
It's the new pitching staff is going to come in here. All the new coaches, the bullpen coach, because they got rid of everybody there on the pitching side because those pitching numbers were so bad. I think they're going to figure it out because Sewald's a free agent, and I do not want him back. And they are not going to pay him either. He's done. They already overpaid for him in that trade. So, and I didn't really like Paul Sewald's attitude coming in. He was like, I'm a 2-pitch pitcher. You either hit it or you don't. I'm like, not great. Not. How about a guy? I work on my craft every day. How about that? Let's do a little bit of that. Like, I guess you figured out what works, and it worked for a long time, but when it stops working, it has stopped working. It is no longer working for Paul Sewald. I think he's done. I think Justin Martinez is a future closer of this team. I think he ended the year as a closer. He's got real closer stuff. So it's just a little bit of, figuring it out for him. And there's going to be ups and downs. It's going to be probably nerve-wracking, but I think Ginkel is perfect as a setup guy. I think Martinez is going to be your guy moving forward, and that's if they don't go to Mr. Outside Hire and actually pay someone to close for this team. So, or make a trade for someone to close for this team, because I think the trade is out the door because they gave up so much for Sewald. I don't think they want to do that again, but this was the issue. This was the whole issue. You lead the league in runs and you lead the league in blown saves, or were close. I can't remember who actually led it, but I think the D-backs were pretty close. So, yeah, man, it's a miserable existence in the bullpen in Chase Field. I've never really liked any of our closers, to be honest with you. I know people love Valverde. Never liked him. Matt Manti was awful. Byung-Hyun Kim almost lost us a World Series, and so we need to get that sage, get Kyrie Irving in there to sage that bullpen, figure out what is going on in it, because it has just been awful.
Do you guys have JJ Putz for a while?
Putz was good, and Putz is on the broadcast now. I think he's on the radio team. So he was fine. Not good, but he was fine for us. He was that was near the tail end of his career, which is why he ended up, doing media with the D-backs. But I just, the bullpen, and look, every bullpen is like this. I'm not breaking news, unless you have Hoffman or Rivera or, somebody back there to hold it down for 2 decades, then, these are all failed starters. Every single one of them is doing a job they probably didn't want to go in doing. Houston Street, very few guys, start in the bullpen, stay in the bullpen, and that's it for their whole career. But it's bad on the back end, man. Even like they trade for Dylan Floro. What was the ERA with us? 9 or something? It was absurd, and I'm sure you guys can tell in my voice. It still makes me mad. Yeah. We didn't make it. 9.37 was Dylan Floro's ERA with us. Scott McGuff was 7.44. Ryan Thompson was good. Kevin Ginkel was good. Justin Martinez was good, but Paul Sewald with a 4.31. And Justin Martinez had 6 losses. Ryan Thompson had 5 losses. You know what I mean? Like, these guys blew games as well. So something needs to get figured out in that bullpen. But going into the season, going in the offseason, I assume it's Justin Martinez, because I don't think they're going to spend a lot more money on it. And I do think if they spend more money on it, it's going to be on the guys behind them. Maybe AJ Puck, maybe AJ Puck could get in there as well. Maybe it's more of a competition than I'm making it out to be. But I think Torey wants Martinez to be back there. I think that's his goal.
I think that's what they should do. Maybe try and strengthen the other pieces. Hell, maybe see if Will Smith's available. You'll probably get a World Series out of it if you can get him in your pen. But yeah, there are some moves that they can make. Maybe they try Martinez. Puka is actually a fairly serviceable reliever. He's not a starter, as we learned this year, but he can be a serviceable reliever. So interesting stuff. If you want to hear about some bullpen woes, just go look at the Blue Jays bullpen WAR. It was like minus 3.5 or something. Like I can definitely relate there on shitty bullpens. But Boggs,
Well, the thing is, we were up in most of these games because we scored so many runs, and
that's
then the
true.
bullpen blows it. You know what I mean? It's
Blew it
not
away.
like we're already down 3, and then the bullpen still sucks. Who cares at that
Yeah,
point?
that's
You
that's
know?
my neck of the woods for sure. But Boggs, I know you're real busy right now, and I hate to have kept you longer than I anticipated,
Whatever.
but
It's
thank you
fine.
so much for starting off this little series we're going to be doing this off season, man. I appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Joe, and hope everybody enjoys it. And like I said, ITL will be back with baseball coverage. Welsh is already at the Arizona Fall League, started yesterday, and he's out there posting videos. So follow him for some AFL news. That stuff is going on right now as well.
For all 7 of you who are listening to this right now, I hope you guys are enjoying. I know that this is peak football and basketball season, which, hell, I don't do enough plugs for the Old Man Squad, but if you're here on the YouTube channel, there's a lot of videos from Dan Bespris. You can check him out over on the Twitter. We're plugging everything today. Make sure you're checking out the podcast, the YouTube, and everything else. Go check out Bogman at Bogman Sports over on Twitter. He shares out all of his latest stuff, the Fantasy Pro stuff, the In This League podcast. Everything can be found over there. If you're looking for more of my work, at Joe Orico 99. But that will do it, guys. We're going to be at you again later in the week talking some White Sox with Mike Carter. We're going to be talking some Braves with Chris Clegg. So we're going to have a lot of fun. But until then, everybody take care. Have yourselves a great night.